In this chapter, it finally became clear that both Davy Jones and Joy Boy were a major obstacle to Imu-chan. And judging by that scene back during the Reveille, when Imu was cutting up Luffy and Blackbeard's wanted posters, it's pretty clear how Imu sees them. To Imu, Blackbeard represents the Davy Jones and Luffy represents Joy Boy. So it's safe to assume he's already planning to hit both of them with Tomi Reverse as soon as the opportunity arises. Interestingly, here in Japan, a lot of fans have been saying that Imu's Tomi Reverse ability feels too overpowered, that it's breaking One Piece power balance altogether. And honestly, I get it. I mean, the thought of Luffy getting Tomi reversed, yeah, no one wants to see that. That said, if we look at how Imu used it on Roxy Zebek, someone who carried Davy's will and bloodline, it's only a matter of time before he tries the same thing on Luffy once the flashback ends and the story shifts back to Elbaf. Before that happens though, I'm already worried about Zoro, Sanji, and the new giant warrior pirates who headed for the upper world ahead of Luffy, Loki, and Hyrurin. Still, even though Tomi Reverse looks like an unbeatable move, when you step back and look at the whole story of One Piece, you start to notice there's a clear weakness built into it. Even Rox, one of the strongest characters we've ever seen, only fell to it because of very specific conditions. The same pattern applies to the giant in Elbaf as well. Alright, so in today's video, we're going to deep dive into Davy Jones and Imu's ability, analyzing everything that was revealed in the latest chapter, but specifically from the perspective of the Japanese version of One Piece. The Japanese used in One Piece is incredibly unique. Every character has direct way of speaking, and sometimes even a single word can carry layers of personality of tone that just don't come through in the translation. That's why every week, right when new chapter drops, I publish full article breaking down all Japanese dialogue and narration line by line. So if you're one of those deep readers who enjoys comparing the English version with the original Japanese version, and you want to catch those hidden nuances, come check out my channel or my Patreon page. I share full translations, context notes, and cultural breakdowns there for every new chapter. Oh, and totally unrelated, but the other day I won this from UFO Catcher in Japan. How adorable Furen is here. Japan's game centers actually have tons of One Piece figures as prizes or other anime and manga characters, so if you ever visit, definitely stop by and give it a try. You might end up going home with your favorite character. The king of the world was Davy Jones, but in response to that, Imu says, he was never the king, not even for a single moment. Now, judging from Rock's personality, it doesn't really sound like he was lying. Even if Davy Jones wasn't technically the king from Imu's point of view, he must have held a position very close to that, something equivalent in power or influence. And in my last video, I mentioned that Rox called Imu the king of the sewer rats. That insult came from the idea that the 20 kingdoms couldn't keep up with the Great Kingdom's level of science, so they resorted to using slaves just to compete, something Rox found utterly disgusting. If we follow that logic, the true center of the world during the Boys' Century wasn't the 20 kingdoms, but the Great Kingdom itself. So maybe Davy Jones wasn't the official ruler, but more like a temporary, or acting king of the Great Kingdom. That could explain why there's such a disagreement between how Rox and Imu describe him. But then, there's what Robin once said. According to the legend, Davy Jones was an old pirate who served as a deckhand, Kampancho. If that's true, it raises a fascinating possibility. What if Joy Boy and Davy Jones were once crewmates? Joy Boy as the captain and Davy Jones as his first mate, the ultimate duo of the ancient seas. And maybe at some point their paths split. Joy Boy continued chasing freedom as a ultimate pirate, while Davy Jones turned toward ambition, aiming not for the sea, but for the throne of the world. It's a classic One Piece setup, two men who share the dream, only for their ideas to clash and lead them down completely different paths. What's really fascinating is that Joy Boy himself also seems to be destined to become a king of some kind. When MF spoke to Luffy through telepathy, he said this line, "I'm sorry, Joy Boy, I couldn't make you king." So that raises the question, what kind of the king was Joy Boy supposed to become? The obvious answer would be Pirate King. But according to Vegapunk, Joy Boy was the actually first man in the history ever to be called a pirate. If the concept of the pirate didn't even exist before him, then it doesn't really make sense that he was aiming to be Pirate King. So maybe it's something much bigger, given the clue that the D lineage is somehow connected to the moon, and that 800 years ago there might be interaction between the people of the Earth, Blue Planet, and those from the moon. Maybe Joy Boy's real goal was to become the king of Cosmos, the ruler beyond the Blue Planet itself. Or, as Vegapunk mentioned in his broadcast, the current world of One Piece is a harsh place for rare races like Lunarians and Buccaneers. People born different are forced to live in hiding. So maybe Joy Boy's true dream was to become the king of all things. Someone who could create a world where every race and every creature could live freely side by side. That will fit perfectly with what we know of Joy Boy's spirit, a man chasing freedom not just for himself, but for everyone. Another huge keyword in this chapter, one that really stood out, is yume, dream. Now, in some translations, that word actually got cut out or paraphrased, but in Japanese version, it's crystal clear. At one point, Imu says, "Yume o miru na," don't dream. And that word, yume, which means dream, appears again later in the key line where Imu orders rocks. "Warasero Davy no yume o." That line hits hard, and if you think about it, it's a complete opposite of the one of the most iconic lines in the all of One Piece. "Hito no yume wa owaranee." People's dream never ends. That line, of course, comes from Blackbeard. And I think that's not a coincidence. It's very likely the phrase he inherited from someone, maybe Rocks himself, or possibly Eris. In this chapter, Imu tries desperately to erase Davy's dream, to crush that inherited will. But in direct defiance of that, Teach, carrying Davy's bloodline and his will, proclaims the exact opposite. "Hito no yume wa owaranee." People's dream never ends. And remember that scene in Mocktown when Luffy hears Blackbeard say that line? He doesn't argue. He doesn't laugh. He just stares. He looks at Teach with that deep, wordless expression, almost like something inside him, on a genetic level, recognized that connection. Maybe that's why he stayed silent, because even without knowing it, he felt that ancient bond between the two Ds. Before Rocks completely transformed into his demonic form, he asked him this chilling question. Which one are you more afraid of? Davy Jones or Joy Boy? Now, this is huge, because we've already seen that Imu was terrified when the MS unleashed Joy Boy's haki after untying that ancient seal. That level of fear wasn't just shock, it was pure, instinctive dread. And right after that moment, Imu sent the God's Knights to Elbaf, most likely to recruit the giants under his control, a defensive move born straight out of that fear. And the idea of fear itself has been the major recurring theme throughout the Elbaf arc. Kiringam's Muma monsters, for example, were created from things that children feared most. Even among the adults, fear plays a role. We saw that for many of the giants, the thing he feared most wasn't death or battle, but their own wives. And if we connect that with the Straw Hat Pirates, there's a funny parallel too. Remember when Luffy heard that Absalom was planning to marry Nami? In the Thriller arc, he said, "Whoa, he's got guts to marry Nami." So even for Luffy, maybe Nami herself counts as one of the few things he's actually afraid of. It might sound like a joke at first, but this idea of fear, or rather, emotional fluctuation, could actually be the key to resisting Imu's power. Here's why. Take Hancock's Mero Mero no Mi, for example. Her ability can only turn people to stone when they are consumed by lust or impure thoughts. Remember how Momonga was able to stab his own hand to kill the feeling and cancel out the effect of Mero Mero no Mi? That shows that the emotional control, or rather purity of intent, can completely negate certain abilities. Big Mom's power works on the same principle. When someone feels fear, their soul can literally be ripped out of their body, but their mind stays firm. If they feel no fear, her ability doesn't activate at all. The same goes for Haki. We've seen that when someone's mind waves, their Haki loses stability. Katakuri, for example, couldn't use his observation Haki properly when his composure broke, and even the gag scenes, Oda Sensei plays with this idea. Remember how Luffy, made of rubber, will still get completely beaten up by Nami, who doesn't even use Haki. That's because emotionally Luffy lets it hit. His guard drops because it's not about strength, it's about his state of mind. And Oda Sensei even talked about this once in SBS Question. When asked why Nami can punch Luffy, he answered, "When a crewmate hits another, it's a form of discipline. It carries care and compassion. That's why it lands. It hits the heart." So by that logic, Imu's Domi Reverse ability might also follow that same emotional rule. If Imu is in a state of fear, or if the person being targeted feels no fear and no inner conflict whatsoever, there's a real chance the attack can be resisted. When Nemeth unleashed Joy Boy's Haki, the sear, otherworldly pressure weight made Imu visibly tremble with fear. And in that same instant, the transformation of the five elders were undone, their monstrous forms vanished, and they were forcibly warped back to Marijor. From what we've seen, it's pretty clear that Imu is the one who granted the five elders both their transformation abilities and their power to teleport through the abyss. So the fact that all of that got shut down the moment Imu felt fear suggests something important. When Imu himself experiences terror or emotional instability, his powers temporarily stop functioning. In other words, even someone as godlike as Imu isn't immune to humans' weakness, fear. The one thing he tries to erase from others might just be his own greatest vulnerability. That brings us to an interesting question. If Rox looks like someone who feared absolutely nothing, how did they manage to Domi-reverse him? Well, think back to that moment right before it happened. Imu deliberately brings up Rock's wife and child. And as Dragon once said, 子は親の弱点だ. A child is a parent's weakness. Even someone as mentality unshakable as Rox, who normally wouldn't flinch no matter what, could be thrown off the balance the moment his family was mentioned. By making him picture their lives in danger, Imu created a moment of emotional instability, just enough for Domi Reverse to take effect. The same logic applies to the giant warrior pirates. Right before they were reversed, their minds were also shaken, triggered by the image of their own wife's Muma form. That emotional crack, that split second of doubt, made them easy prey for Imu's power. And there's another telling line from Imu. There was never a king easier to control than Harold. That's probably because Harold is a king who constantly agonized over peace, a man ruled by inner conflict. A lot of readers have asked, if Imu can just Domi-reverse people, why didn't he take control of Elbaf from the start? The answer is likely this. The previous kings of Elbaf were warriors to the core, absolute, decisive, driven purely by strength. They had no hesitation, no emotional opening, they couldn't be controlled. But Harold is different. He doubts, he hesitates, he questions his own decisions. And that very humanity, that kindness, is what made him the easiest king for Imu to manipulate. So Oda Sensei is showing us something chilling here. Im doesn't defeat people through raw power, he conquers them through their hearts. And when Rox asked Im, which one are you more afraid of, Davy Jones or Joy Boy? Im's reply was, 夢を見るな。あんな奴らもう二度と現れぬ。Stop dreaming. Those kind of people will never appear again. Now, the keyword here is yatsura, that them. It's a plural pronoun in Japanese, meaning Im isn't referred to just one person, but to multiple individuals. So that pretty much confirms what we've been talking about here, and also on Dawn Dusk channel, that Davy D. Jones and Joy Boy are two separate people. I actually get a lot of comments saying, aren't Joy Boy and Davy Jones supposed to be the same person? So I've always wondered, maybe in English translations it was phrased in the way that made it sound like they were one or the same. If anyone knows where that interpretation starts spreading, I'd genuinely love to hear it. Because in original Japanese version, there's no line for hint that implies they are same person. If they were one person, Imu would have said yatsu, the singular form. But since he clearly says them, yatsura, we can confidently say, at least for now, that Joy Boy and Davy D. Jones are two distinct individuals. There's something really intriguing to think about here. Remember when Vegapunk did that global broadcast and started revealing the truth about the Boys Century? He specifically talked about Joy Boy as the main character of that Boys Century, the man who lived 900 years ago, born in the Great Kingdom that possessed an incredibly advanced scientific civilization. That kingdom eventually went to war against the Alliance of the 20 Kingdoms, the group that later becomes the foundation of the today's world government. And according to Vegapunk, that war itself was the Boys Century. But after seeing this latest chapter, the conversation between Imu and Rox, it's clear that Davy D. Jones was just as dangerous and significant to Imu as Joy Boy was. So that raises the question, if both of them were equally important in that ancient war, why didn't Vegapunk mention Davy D. Jones at all during his broadcast? The key might lie in that abrupt break in the transmission. It's possible that the exact part Oda Sensei chose to censor, the part that got cut off mid-broadcast, was when Vegapunk was talking about Davy D. Jones. And if you remember carefully, during that brief, garbled moment before the feed went dead, you can still hear him say, that name, その名前. It's very possible that that name was referring to Davy D. Jones. There's another big clue too. Right before the transmission cut out, we see that eerie close-up of Blackbeard's face, his furrowed teeth visible. That's not a coincidence, it's classic Oda Sensei's foreshadowing. Think about it this way, Luffy carries the power of the sun god Nika, while Blackbeard commands the power of darkness, so symbolically it makes sense that Joy Boy would represent the dawn and Will of the Day brings light to the world, while Davy D. Jones would embody the dusk, the will of the day that plunges the world into darkness. That duality, the dawn and the dusk of the D lineage, might be the real hidden meaning behind the name D itself. So if you follow that logic, Joy Boy's will was passed down through Roger and finally to Luffy, and Davy D. Jones' will was passed down through Rox and now lives on in Blackbeard. To inherited wills, to opposing destinies, the light and the shadow of the same letter D, fated to collide at the end of the Great Pirate Era. That brings us back to one of the most powerful moments in the entire series, Whitebeard's final words. As he's dying, he recalls his last conversation with Roger and he says to Blackbeard, "You are not the one. The man Roger's waiting for is definitely not you, Teach." Then he adds, "Someday someone will appear carrying the weight of the centuries of history and challenge this entire world." Now, this line can be interpreted in completely different ways depending on whether Whitebeard knows that Teach was connected to Rox. If he understood Teach to be carrying the bloodline of the will of Davy D. Jones, then that line takes on a deeper meaning. It would mean that the man Roger was waiting for wasn't Davy Jones, but Joy Boy. And that ties in perfectly with Vegapunk's statement too. In his broadcast, he's referred to Joy Boy, not Davy, as the protagonist of the boys' century. So from the world perspective, the figure they've all been hoping for, the one who'll bring the dawn of the world, is the successor of Joy Boy's will. But then Vegapunk also said something chilling. It won't necessarily be Joy Boy's successor who obtains it. In other words, even if someone inherits Joy Boy's ideal, it doesn't guarantee they'll be the one to reach the treasure. There's still a real possibility that the person who ultimately claims the One Piece might not be the heir of Joy Boy's will, but the successor of Davy Jones' will instead. And if that happens, that will mark the moment when Davy Jones' long-forgotten dream to claim the throne of the world itself finally becomes reality. When Eris saw Rox lose control and fully transform into demon, she said, 負けたのね。あいつとまだ会うの早かったよね。So you lost. I guess it was too soon for you to face that man. That line alone tells us that she already understood who Im was. It suggests Rox knew the true nature of Im's ability and he's told Eris about it. So when she saw him into the demon, she immediately realized that Rox had fallen victim to Im's power, and when she says, あいつと会うのまだ早かったよね. It was too soon for you to face that man. It's probably because Rox hadn't yet completed the two things he'd been chasing, obtaining 2 devil fruits and reviving Galera. Without those, he simply wasn't ready to confront Imu. I actually talked about this in detail in my previous video. Yeah, the one the algorithm didn't really bless with much reach. Anyway, I mentioned that I believe that the promise, yakusoku, Rox keeps referring to is deeply connected to the arc of promise, Noah. It's not confirmed yet, but based on what we know, that arc was most likely built by the giant shipwrights of Galera. That will mean Rox was researching for Galera because he was trying to build a new arc to forcefully fulfill the ancient promise that was made during the boys' century. In other words, he wasn't just chasing history, he was trying to recreate it. There's another detail I really want to highlight. When Eris saw Rox fully turn into a demon, she said, "We have to jump into the sea. We can only swim." Now, the fact that she thought the only way to escape Demon Rox was to jump into the ocean tells us something huge. It suggests that Im's Domireverse ability can't function properly in the sea. Remember, Vegapunk's theory, devil fruits represent the potential of humans' evolution, but that unnatural power comes with a curse. In other words, the sea, the mother of all nature, rejects them. So it stands to reason that Im's devil-like power is also weakened or maybe even nullified when surrounded by the seawater. That connects perfectly with the promise we've been talking about. Vegapunk predicted that the world would one day sink beneath the sea, and that might be exactly when that ancient promise is meant to be fulfilled. That's why the Ark of Noah was created in the first place, to survive that moment. So maybe the idea of the world sinking isn't just some world government's doomsday plan. Maybe even the Great Kingdoms knew it was coming, and they prepared for it. That's why the Ark of Noah has been preserved all this time, not as a relic of the past, but as a vessel for the next beginning. Meanwhile, Dragon, having lost track of Shanks, was in despair, saying, "I couldn't even save a single baby." It turns out Shanks had fallen asleep inside treasure chest, and one of the Roger's crew, seemingly Taro, was shown carrying that chest onto the ship. This version of Dragon really mirrors that scene on Sabaody Archipelago, where Luffy broke down after losing his crew, crying, "I couldn't even save a single Nakama." And what's interesting in that, in both cases, Kuma is the one who steps on to save Luffy's Nakama and God Valley citizens. At Sabaody, he saves Luffy's crew from Kizaru, Borsalino, and Pacifistas, and at God Valley, he rescues 500 locals and slaves. After Luffy's breakdown, he went through 2 years of training, but what about Dragon? What did he do after the tragedy at God Valley? Personally, I think that's when he started opening like Sword does today. Not actual Sword organization, but I think he did the same thing. For context, Sword members are Marines who returned their Marines code, meaning they basically handed in their resignation. They act as dependent strike force, technically part of the Marines, but free to ignore orders when necessary. At the same time, the Marines have no responsibility for their actions, and can abandon them at any time. So I think after God Valley, Dragon lost faith in Marine justice, but at the same time, that failure, not being able to save even a single child, must have haunted him. So he probably returned his Marine code, deciding to act on his own justice, even if it meant being disowned by the organization. Eventually, that path led him to leave the Marine altogether. In fact, the early symbol of the revolutionary armies had a sword emblem in it. That's not coincidence. It's likely that Marines who, like Dragon, began questioning the world government justice, inherited his ideals, and later formed the secret special forces unit we now know as SWORD. And as for Kuma, just like I predicted in that earlier video, he actually managed to help Aris and Blackbeard escape from God Valley, which means whatever he realized it or not, he ended up saving the 2 people who inherited the will of the figure Imu fears the most. Luffy, who carries Joy Boy's will, and Teach, who carries Davy Jones' will. But here's the irony. Even though Kuma later lost his free will and became the living weapon, he still played a role in capturing Shirahoshi, another person Imu seems to consider a major threat. So when you think about it, Kuma is actually the person in the entire story who has come into contact with all 3 of the individuals Imu wants to gone the most: Luffy, Teach, and Shirahoshi. That's wild when you really think about it. He's like the quiet thread trying to hold together. So yeah, in this video, we focus mainly on the mystery surrounding Davy Jones, breaking it down from the perspective of the original Japanese version of the latest chapter One Piece. There's still ton more I want to unpack, so if you want a deep dive with more linguistic details and extended analysis, make sure to check out my page. And by the way, I also offer private Japanese lessons and translation for marketing support for people running business in Japan. If that sounds interesting, feel free to reach out via Instagram or email. The links are in the description. Alright, that's it for today's breakdown. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.